Welcome to the CodeBreaker Mindset, where leaders share the unwritten rules for success. I'm your host, Chitra Nawbatt. Joining us today is Yannick Colaco, co-founder of FanCode. Yannick, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Chitra.
You've been passionate about democratizing access to sports, especially for youth, for most of your career. You were the first head of NBA India before co-founding FanCode. Take us through your journey.
You know, I've grown up completely, extremely passionate about sport itself, right? I've grown up as someone who played sports really passionately, who followed sports as a kid, as a teenager, and when I started working in media, I was really fortunate enough to be able to join a very nascent sports industry in the early 2000s, initially with IMG, then with a company called Nimbus Sport, which ran this amazing commercial program for rights across India and many parts of the world. And then obviously with the NBA and with FanCode. So I think from my perspective, being able to have the opportunity to work in a profession and industry that I'm so passionate about has been something that I've been very fortunate to be able to do. I My first stint when I actually started working in cricket. I was working with this company Nimbus, and we were doing a lot of stuff around the ICC Cricket World Cup. I spent some time in South Africa in 2003, setting up the commercial rights office there. A lot of the stuff that I've seen in the initial time when sport was actually growing up in in India to where it is now, there's been a sea change, especially among sports fans and followers of sport across the country. So, when I joined the NBA in 2000, in the early 2013, 2014, the goal was always to try and figure how can you actually grow the game of basketball and with it the brand of the NBA. But everything was about doing it from the grassroots, from the bottom up. And that was a vision which, at that point, the Commissioner David Stern, then Commissioner David Stern had, and obviously Adam Silver has been really pushing. So it was a really, really great experience for me to be able to look at work with this global brand, which is so successful in obviously in the US and in many other countries across the world, and try to bring this brand, the vision that it had of building sports from the bottom up into India. So I did that for close to 6 years, worked with them in terms of setting up their first junior NBA program for youth, or close to 8 to 9 million youth across the country. Their licensing program, bringing the first NBA global game into India. And then close to 6 years ago, I wanted to get on to working more in sports, and especially, as you said, like democratizing access to sport, in which is why I co-founded at that point the sports fans only streaming platform called FanCode. And we started by saying that we wanted to provide access to a whole bunch of sport to fans across the country. And today we've crossed over 160 million users. We now stream, close to 20,000 live games a year across 12 different sports. And, we've been extremely excited by the business that we're building.
So, before we get more into fan code, how did the NBA India find you or vice versa?
So I actually, while I was working with Nimbus, I was actually extremely keen, as I said, right, in terms of figuring how could I actually contribute to growing sport as a genre, as an industry in India. And I was really keen about trying to figure how I could how I could activate or work with activation, especially grassroots sports. One of the challenges that India has had is the level of training, the level of exposure, the level of access to kids in sport was very limited. So I chanced on a meeting with the then president of international of the NBA, Heidi Uberoth, who was looking at, they had just set up a nascent office or wanted to set up a nascent office in India. And they spoke to me about, their plans and saying that, is this something you would be interested in? And I was, yeah, NBA is a big global brand. They want to obviously build this great business in India, which is sounds exciting, but it was a little bit different from what I wanted to do at that point, which was really work into the weeds of grassroots training. But then Heidi was kind enough to invite me to the NBA office in the US, and to kind of meet their senior management and talk to, and I as someone in the sports industry or growing up in the sports industry, I looked up to David Stern as someone who was like the pinnacle of what sports administration and sports business drivers were. So I was extremely excited to meet David Stern and a whole bunch of other NBA people, and it was really interesting. I met David Stern and Adam Silver at that point, and David was kind enough to spend close to, I think, a couple of hours on a Tuesday with me, and I was completely blown away by the way he envisioned the NBA and basketball and its global growth. And the bottom line was that he always talked about the NBA's destiny in any country being directly linked to that of basketball. And when he spoke about how the process was more important in terms of making basketball popular from the bottom, getting kids to play, teaching them the right way, building talent, and then that would eventually lead in the growth of the NBA. That really excited me, and that's something that I was fortunate enough. I walked away from the meeting saying, "Hey, I want to be a part of this," and I was fortunate enough to be tasked with that role, and I spent 6 years of really rewarding years of working with the NBA, working across multiple things it did, from, as I said, the building the junior NBA program in India, to building NBA schools, building their first NBA academy, and helping bring their first global game and stuff to the country. So it was a very exciting period for me, both professionally as well as personally, as a massive sports fan.
Give us a sense of the size and scale of basketball and the broader sports market in India, because India is almost 1.5 billion people. You talked about FanCode having 160 million users. Talk about the market opportunity for sports in India, and then how you came up with the idea for FanCode.
Yeah, I think India has actually, it's a very young country, right? I mean, it's in India. The country was born in 1947, so it's not. It's a country which is close to what, 75, 76 years since it was independent. So there's been a transformatic change, especially among youth in the country in the last 2 or 3 decades. Um, 25 years ago, the concept of sport as a means of, as part of culture, almost didn't exist. Education, especially for kids in school, education was, how you did in maths, how you did in science, and sports was something you did if you had the time. So it wasn't really something that was an important part of the fabric of society. That's changed significantly in the last 2 decades. And what has changed is that the younger population has started adopting sport. You see a lot more kids playing sport. Sport has become now a part of the fabric of and the culture of schools, right? Where every child is playing sport. I know you've made a few trips to India recently. If you walk through any suburb in Mumbai, you will find a lot of turfs where kids are playing football, basketball, they're playing pickleball, paddle, tennis, this whole bunch. There's this entire revolution about participation. And with that has come fandom. So I actually think that in the last 20 years, the fandom of sport, especially among your young audiences, has grown significantly. There's some estimates that say that sport fandom in India is over 600 million sports fans in this country. What's really interesting for me, or what was really interesting and what kind of birthed the idea of fan code, was when we looked at about 6, 7 years ago when I was with the NBA. While sports fandom was growing significantly, the economics of linear television and linear broadcasting meant that all stakeholders continued to be focused more on mass popular sports, right? So the IPL, which is the Indian Premier League, was available on close to 28 linear channels, right, in different languages and stuff. Had tremendous amount of marketing and coverage. But the La Liga or the Bundesliga or the domestic cricket didn't have the same amount of kind of coverage. So we estimated when we did research before we launched FanCode that close to 99% of sports activity, professional sports activity in the world, didn't have proper coverage, which essentially meant that while sports fandom was growing, access for those sports fans of live sport that they loved was actually not growing at all. And that's where we saw that as an opportunity of using digital and building a digital platform which could actually address these kind of problems that sports fans faced. And obviously, the advantage of digital is, unlike a linear channel, when you can only at one point of time put broadcast one game on one channel. Digital doesn't have the same restriction, right? You're able to actually cater to niche audiences across the country. You can build journeys where you can get them to retain them. You can build businesses around lifetime value around those customers. So that was really what fueled the start of FanCode, where we essentially started our content business by saying, how do we solve this problem of access of sports content to sports fans in this country? So we launched, next week we're going to be 6 years old. So we literally launched almost 6 years ago, and we started off with a whole bunch of sport, as I said, and like this, a couple of weekends ago, we were doing on a Saturday close to 150 live games across 9 different sports. So it's really, and the ability to service audiences across the country, that's something that we've been really excited about.
So let's get into the rules of the game because you've launched two businesses, FanCode and NBA India. And sports is, as you and I have talked about, is the intersection of
Right.
consumer media technology. What are the rules of the game in the sports business?
So I think everything starts with, it's, we keep talking about it, it starts with consumer need, right? I think in the sports business, it's what what kind of differs it a little bit from everything else or regular businesses is the, I think, the over indexation of passion, right? I don't think anything incites the level of tribalism or level of passion that sports does among fans. That, I think, is something which is unique to the business of sport, and that's something which needs to be harnessed. It's obviously also it's a big challenge because you can't afford to make mistakes, right? You can afford to have a little buffering on your movie, but you can't afford to have a single second of dropped content on a live game, because that same passion then goes away from the sports fan and goes towards the technology provider in anger. So that's something that's unique about sports. I think the other thing which is unique about sports, which we've looked to really, really tap in, is that sports as a form of entertainment is pure in the sense that the story being written in a game of sport, right? The story that you're watching as a consumer is actually being written as you watch. No one knows what's going to happen. Today, when you're watching a movie on Netflix, on your favorite OTT streamer, you know that this is it's a drama, it's a comedy show, it's got a cast of characters. You know that the story's already been written, but you're kind of watching it and you're getting entertained with it. A live sports game is unique in the sense that once that moment is finished and it's recorded, then the nature of that entertainment changes. So that's also something which is really unique about sport, and something we've looked to harness, in a sense that the live element of it is what really, really binds communities together, brings fans together, kind of pushes that passion up. And that's something that you really, really have to build for, both in terms of the experience you have to build for consumers, as well as in terms of your business model. So that's something which is unique to sport itself.
And was there a specific unwritten rule that you learned along the way, launching and building NBA India and then launching and building FanCode?
So I think the it's a double-edged sword being passionate about sport. So I think and especially both in NBA and in fan code, right? I think uh, being passionate about the sport you watch or the sport you're serving consumers, sometimes you mistake yourself for every consumer, right? So it's also extremely important to have a balancing act. It's important to be able to say, hey, like when we think about features sometimes on fan code, like we're like, oh, this is a feature which every fan would love, but this is a feature which I would love, right? So it's important to be able to balance that, so that passion, double-edged sword of passion, to be able to at one point sit back or have another view And that's where data really, really helps. It really, really helps tell you whether what you're doing is, you're being blind to certain sports, you're being blind to the own passion that you have for a sport. So that's it's kind of double-edged sword that you need to constantly play around with and make sure you're balanced out.
And who taught you the rules of the game, especially the unwritten ones? And let's look at it in two buckets because you as the first head of NBA India, it's a well-established brand in the United States and other parts of the world, multi-billion dollar franchise, property, business. You're now bringing that into India, launching it, shepherding it. So, who taught you the written and the unwritten rules in terms of how you interact and build that productive relationship with the NBA, headquartered out of New York? And then, similarly, teaching you as you full entrepreneurship with FanCode.
So I think the two biggest, I think, again, I've been extremely fortunate to have people who've been very comfortable in informal mentorship, right? As I said, like every single time I've spent time with David Stern, with Adam Silver, with people around, in India who've been kind enough to give their time to me. I think just being able to bounce ideas of people and get their opinion, I think that really is one of the biggest ways to kind of understand. And because the fact that it's unwritten means that no one really knows what the rule is, right? I think being able to learn from other people's experience, being able to toss ideas to them and get their opinion on how to behave in certain ways. And I think most importantly is following. When you say leading by example, I think it's the other way also. Following by example of people you admire, how they behave with others, how they are able to interact in certain situations, how they react to that situation. I think that's something that's really, really helped me kind of navigate a lot of this. And I think the second thing is I'm a really, really curious person by nature. So I read a lot. I talk to a lot of people. I'm constantly asking people their opinions on what they think. I think that really helps, and that kind of sets in terms of being able to absorb new information, being able to analyze that, being able to apply that, and being able to kind of figure what version of that is something which is right for me. I think that's also really important to be able to.
You talked about a couple of strong leaders, a couple of key figures. And along the way of what you've had to do both at FanCode as well as NBA India, it's building critical relationships and networks that you just mentioned with complex, nuanced stakeholders. At FanCode, a critical relationship is with your investor, Harsh Jain, the founder of Dream Sports. And when you were at the NBA, it was with the late David Stern, former NBA commissioner, the current commissioner, Adam Silver, Mukesh Ambani, the Ambani family. These people have strong personalities, highly driven, very complex, very nuanced. How did you build meaningful relationships with them? And if you could give us an example.
So I think as I said, right? I think it kind of changes the fact that each person you build a relationship with is unique, irrespective of how successful they are, right? I mean, you've talked about some very, very successful people, but I think that's applicable to peers. It's applicable to people who work in fan code. So I think that every single person. I think the most important thing is to actually be able to find how you connect with people, and a lot of it is natural. So I'll give you an example of Harsh and I've known each other for years, and we share a common passion for Manchester United, right? We're both massive fans, and we're both generally massive sports fans. Like, and I think being a massive sports fan, you kind of speak a language which is similar. We actually did business with each other in the past. We actually, I mean, the idea of fan code and of Dream Sports investing and kind of incubating it actually came from the fact that I went to him for advice of this project I wanted to start, not as an investor, and just saying that this is something I want to start in the sports ecosystem. He had already gone through the process of setting up a very, very successful startup in sports, which is Dream 11, right? This extremely successful fantasy gaming company. So I actually went to him for advice, saying that, hey, how did you deal with investors? How did you start up? And that eventually turned into a conversation where he said, hey, why don't you come and do this with us? In this space, because we kind of have the same kind of engagement within it. I think the relationship with David Stern with obviously Adam Silver, was founded on uh, that entire their vision for what they believed the NBA stood for, and me trying to figure how we could actually replicate that or manifest that into building it in India. So it was really about asking, being curious, asking about questions, giving them feedback about, obviously India works differently than Australia, differently than the US, being giving them the opportunity to also understand of that. Both David and Adam made trips to India. They took time out of their schedules to come and visit market, which was, I think, really important to be able to understand, meet people around here, understand nuances. In fact, it was on David's first trip that we actually built a relationship with the Ambanis, where David had this meeting with Mukesh Ambani, and they hit it off, and they spoke about trying to build this entire program for grassroots, which is where the Reliance Foundation Junior NBA program started from. And we actually started. I remember that time, like no one really knew that whether this could work. This was about getting uh, training PE teachers to actually teach their school kids how to learn the game of basketball. And we started that with two cities, and we went on, till a few years ago when I left, it was in, I think, like 35 cities across the country, and it had like 9 million kids. A lot of that, again, as I said, it's about leveraging uh, leveraging what you understand of what you have, and then being able to find commonality. I think the biggest advantage that most people who are passionate about sports have is that most other people in the industry are also passionate about sports. So you start with a common ground. We all love the business we are in. So that's obviously a big kind of advantage, because you're starting from there.
What do you think it was that got the Ambani family bought in? Because they get approached by hundreds, thousands of opportunities on a yearly basis, perhaps more than that. What got
I
them bought
think
in, you think?
Yeah, I think at that time it was just David's turn. I mean, I think this meeting that David had with Mukesh and Neeta Ambani, and this was literally, I want to say, what, 10, 12 years ago, for them to launch the Reliance Foundation Junior NBA program. It was just that meeting where they were kind enough to host him at their house and host a dinner for him. And there was this conversation where David spoke about his vision of building grassroots sports and building grassroots basketball. And we kind of left the meeting where the Ambani family actually told David and the NBA, saying, "Listen, tell us how we can help." And we went back and we dove deep into this. We ran this. We said, we'll do this pilot program, and they were immediately. David sent an official letter to Mr. Ambani, and they immediately got back saying, "Yeah, we're in. We're happy to help." And that's where that relationship began.
Let's get into the pivots because in building both the NBA India as well as FanCode, there are voluntary and involuntary pivots.
Right.
Talk about a critical pivot in scaling NBA India, and then let's discuss the same in FanCode.
So I think in NBA was less about pivots as to more kind of trying to understand piece by piece what we were trying to build. I think the vision was very clear, right? The vision was, let's build basketball from the bottom up, and then let's try and figure out how we can continue working with partners, working with good partners. I think that culture, that ethos hasn't changed. That's the NBA's way across: collaborate, work with good partners in each market, and help build basketball from the ground up. So I think what was important in the NBA at that point was to try and build the right way. And I think that may be like a slight difference, right, with the NBA and with FanCode. And the NBA was very sure, it was already a massive global brand. It was very sure about who the NBA was and is, obviously, because it's such a successful brand. So it was about building things the right way, taking small steps. Started with the junior NBA program, it then built an academy. Then it had schools basketball. It had basketball schools. It had this entire licensing program with partners. Had a media partnership. So all of it was it was almost it was this uh, playbook, but trying to figure out what's the right modification, what's the right version of that for India, right? And I think that was really important. Was important to kind of discuss and build that out. from a fan code perspective in a startup, I think for us here it was really when you're trying to build the India's first sports only platform. I mean, it was never done before, right? I think it was for us. It was about trying to build quickly and learn, keep learning. So you, we have this we have this internal kind of acronym that we call HEAL, which is hypothesis, experimentation, actuals, and learning. So we say that you got to have a hypothesis which is well thought through. You have to experiment, so you got to do a lot of A/B testing and stuff with everything we're kind of building. You got to look at the actuals against hypothesis, and then you have a bunch of learnings from it. And the idea is to kind of build that out really quickly, because you can only kind of adapt and kind of decide, how do you modify, course correct consistently or constantly, and kind of build your product. So when something works, how do you double down and grow that really quickly? When something doesn't work, reassess, maybe make some changes, or even drop it. So I think that's something which is unique to FanCode. It's also unique to tech companies, right? Where you have the ability to get consumer feedback so quickly, and there's so much of rich data that you're constantly getting from consumers. So that's something that's been very unique to the startup world, and it's something I've had to learn very quickly.
And on that front of the data, take us into your pattern recognition because what's the data, the signals that you look at, that you're constantly responding to, that you're pivoting your business model?
So I think the main aspects of data, right? I mean, we just have so many. Being a direct to consumer product, you have so many signals that we have from how people use our product. We have things like heat maps in terms of how people scroll, how people click, funnels in terms of where users go to, where they drop off. So I think the first thing we try to focus is new users and recurring users, how they're spending time on the product, features they're using. We ages back decided to launch a feature where we actually found, well, first we found from data that when users were watching cricket on mobile, they were for a T20 game, which is approximately 3.5 hours. They, on an average, came in and out of the game close to 8 times. So, because they were watching on a mobile, they obviously either had distractions or they were dead time between games, between overs in a cricket game. So they came in and out, in and out, in and out, which is not a great way, which meant they weren't engaged enough by that game, right? So we said, how can we create an experience which is more engaging? So what we did was we said, during how do we actually, what's the main thing which engages outside live play? It's just stats. It's right, how players performing. It's things like where they're hitting their shots, what's their weakness. This thing in cricket called wagon wheel, where you're scoring your runs off. So all these stats we kind of presented live to a user in an overlay. A user could tap on the screen, and then they could have a drop down, which essentially during the live game they were able to look at stats, scorecards, and stuff also. So the second thing we found is that users sometimes join late, or they need to kind of get quickly up to date in a game. So we did real time highlights where user could minimize the screen and essentially watch highlights of the fours, sixes, wickets that happened immediately, almost like a minute after they actually happened. So we kind of introduced these features, tested them out in various forms, and we found that the segments, the times users were spending on our platform for that single game actually grew 2x, because they were finding ways to engage themselves. So, and we solved the problem where users were actually coming in and out 8 times, it reduced to 4 times, but their segment time was increasing. So that's just an example of how you actually use real-time data to be able to kind of look at whether how what a user reacts to, and kind of build your product and build the experience on the basis of that.
Earlier, you talked about this notion of manifesting the vision. So, both when it comes to fan code, building a business from scratch, all of the capital requirements, technology, the
Right.
force required. With NBA India, earlier you talked about 1.5 billion people in India, basketball new to the country, the cultural nuances, getting parents bought in around having their kids, having their children learn basketball, play in basketball versus studying. So
Right.
in each of these situations, is there a notion of being a new entrant having to be a force of nature? What's your take on that?
So I actually think a lot of doing things which are a little bit which are new, right? I think the first, you almost need to have, you need to, from a personality perspective, you almost need to have some level of irrational optimism, right? You need to believe. And it's I often take, like, and with most things in life, right, you take the example from the sports field, right? You Every time, basketball is a great example. Every time Steph Curry shoots a shot, he expects it to go in, right? Steph Curry can miss 5 3-pointers in a row, he'll still take the sixth, right? And he expects it to go in. So I think there's a level of being able to, of belief that you need to have. There's a level of adjustment that you need to constantly be adjusting to the information that you have around you, and most importantly, there's a level of work that you need to put in, right? You need to put in the work, especially for new things which are not really been developed before. You need to put the hard work, which is in the research, as you said, in the relationships, in building stuff on the ground up. You need to persevere, knowing that what you build may not really be what the consumer wants. You may need to scrap it completely and build again. So I think those are the kind of the characteristics that are really important. But I think, to have a great belief in your ability to persevere, and to be able to, constantly work with other people and kind of modify as you go along. I think that's really important.
How do you tap into that force of nature within and punch through regardless of the naysayers or even in those low moments? How do you tap into that force of nature within and fuel that and punch through no matter what?
There are many versions of this which I've read, and there are many versions of this which people tell me, right, about how they kind of deal with adversity. For me, it's unique. I think, at least for myself, is that it's people, right? For me, it's there is no, at least I don't, and I know other people, a lot of successful entrepreneurs have this, is that this inner strength of, like, really being able to punch through, as you said, a lot of this on their own. uh, for me, it's just the people around you. It's people who believe in you. It's people who trust that you will do the right thing. And that's for me, it's everyone around. In FanCode, for example, it's every single FanCode, every single person who works with FanCode. It's their belief, it's their trust that you will kind of if through downtimes you kind of figure a solution, and that they kind of always be there backing you. And again, it's close family circle, it's close friends, mentors, people you trust. I think that's really the biggest kind of uh, support, that you're able to put things in perspective a lot, at least for me.
You use this phrase irrational optimism. Let's get into the magic. How do you define serendipity versus intuition?
um, I think that you have to have some level. Listen, there's a level of good fortune that always keeps coming on, right? But I think that's almost in terms of opportunity. You need to be able to seize the opportunity when it comes along. And I think intuition is one aspect, but I think you need to put the hard work in. You need to be prepared for that opportunity, right? So if you haven't done the hard work building up to that, it doesn't matter when that opportunity comes along, you're not going to be able to take advantage of it. So, we talk about, as an organization, right? We're trying to build a culture of, in FanCode, for example, we're trying to build this culture of innovation, this culture of kind of user first, working together to kind of build this. It's the hard miles you put every single day, which kind of sets you up for whenever these opportunities come along. And I think it's like an esports team, right? If you think about it, it's you know it's a cricket player, cricket batsman. When he's facing four balls, he waits for that one bad ball and is able to dispatch it off for a four or a six. It's all the work he's put in which allows him to do that. So I think, putting for me, the work you put in, the effort, the hard work, that I think is non-negotiable. I don't think anyone can be successful without putting that hard work in. The rest it's sometimes timing, as you said, right? It's sometimes it's good fortune in terms of when that time comes in. But I think it's the hard work that you put in to be prepared, to be able to take advantage of that moment. That is non-negotiable.
So, where has serendipity played a critical role in business, whether NBA India or FanCode, or your life?
So I think in terms of timing, even in terms of setting up fan code, right? I think it was the right time where if you look at the confluence of the fact that, as I said earlier, sports fandom has been growing so much. Um, the linear television business was flat, is not really growing because digital as a mode of consumption was increasing tremendously, and the opportunity in the fact that fandom was growing, digital penetration was growing, but access to sport hadn't been solved. Innovation around sport wasn't really being done. So it was the opportunity of saying, hey, like, I've been working in sports and media for years. I've done a lot of work around understanding consumers. The NBA helped me understand what great businesses and great brands in sport should be able to do, and should what outcomes are for a great brand is like. So taking all of that and the timing of it, along with a partner and an investor who had this huge base of sports fans already on their platform and was willing to kind of help us build with those, that was the kind of a confluence of all these things which came together, which gave us the opportunity to launch FanCode.
And given the dynamics that you've just talked about, what's your pattern recognition on how to build and scale a profitable tech and AI related sports companies?
So I,
What are the
I
what are the critical ingredients?
So I think for a direct to consumer company, I think the critical ingredient is to be able to essentially build great products for consumers. So I think we are at the confluence of, when you talk about um, growth, you talk about we keep talking about user metrics, ARPU, lifetime value, all kind of things which are very business metrics driven. I think building great products is essentially one of the biggest, it's extremely tough, but it's one of the biggest kind of challenges that we are trying to actually build. So actually building a great product which consumers are actually have a great experience with, and they have an emotional connect with. We have the content which brings the consumers on our platform, and they enjoy it, and we give a great experience. But building a product which gives them that great experience, and they can walk away and say, wow, like I want to go to FanCode to watch sports content. That's something we're constantly working on.
Do you study outliers? What's their role in the equation for you?
How do you mean outliers?
Because you talked about heal your process,
Right, right,
HEAL, right? And
right,
so whether it's a particular outcome, a data point, something that's an anomaly, something that's off the charts. And
right,
oftentimes an outlier today might become
right,
routine and norm over time. Like if you think about so many years prior, 15, 20 years ago, or whenever YouTube was first created, YouTube was first an
right.
outlier. Social media was first an
Mhm.
outlier. Now it's well the norm, part of every day.
Yeah, yeah. Listen. I think for us, a lot of what we're building, which is new, right, is based on consumer research. And being a direct to consumer company, as I said earlier, you get a lot of feedback very quickly. So when one of the things we did at FanCode was essentially solving a problem again, which I personally had, right? In the sense that every time I wanted to watch a sports event, when I went on one of the entertainment platforms in India, I was like, you want to watch the finals of the French Open? Here, buy my annual pass. I mean, I don't care about the product. I already had like 5 subscriptions of different products. So one of the things that I was very, very conscious of trying to solve for on FanCode was, how do we actually give users choice, right? How do we actually give users the ability to consume what they want, and at the same time increase the kind of number of users who are willing to pay for content, sports content on FanCode? So we tested this out a little bit, and we got a lot of great feedback. And then 4 years ago or 5 years ago, we launched a sachet pricing and packaging on FanCode. So essentially, a user could come on the platform, and if they were to wanted to watch only a weekend of racing of Formula One. They could buy just that. They could also buy the entire season of Formula One and not have access to anything else at FanCode. So being able to create that, so that was really something that was an outlier at that time. I think a lot more companies in future will start doing that in terms of being able to give users, the freedom of choice to be able to choose the content they want and stuff, and make the payments and stuff a lot easier. So that's an example of something that we did, which was not normal, and I think it's going to become more kind of standard going forward.
What's your take on the Codebreaker mindset?
So you need to elaborate that for me again.
Sure. So that there's written and unwritten rules, pivots, serendipity, all part of your journey, part of the equation as you're pursuing whatever opportunity you are, whether it's career, life, building a business, this type of
So I
framework.
Yeah, so I think it's I think everything you do, when whether it's in your personal life or in professional, at least from my perspective, it's about the mindset is always about where you are in that moment, right? And where you are in that particular phase of your life, or in that particular time that you actually have this opportunity to have things around you. So I think the mentality to be able to use all your past experiences, the information that you have from the past, information that you've already assimilated, to be able to react to situations in front of you, and the ability to not get too obsessed with looking too in front of you, right? Looking 5 years, 6 years, because no one knows, right? I mean, everyone wants to be able to know. I think that ability is something that I think is really apt for people today. And I think for professionals, not getting too consumed by what I'm going to be 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 1 year from now. I think that's something is which kind of really will help, and helps me at least able to kind of go through stuff both personally and professionally.
And what's your advice on how to cultivate that mindset? What's your advice on how to cultivate the Codebreaker mindset?
So I would think for me the most important thing is to be present, to be able to be present, and this is not just professionally, right? I've kind of learned this for myself in everything I do, right? But this time spending time with my kids, whether spending time with friends around you, the deputy commissioner of the NBA, Mark Tatum. It used to be amazing. We used to have meetings with Mark, and when you sat with Mark in a meeting, you knew that 100% of his attention was always with you. And I always admired that, because I always struggle to have, like, you always have thoughts in my mind, right? I always struggle when I was with someone to be able to, and I've always tried to, it's something that I learn. And I mean, again, it's something that I've always tried to imitate. I can't do that as well as he does, but I think being present and being able to do that, it takes a lot of practice. But I think that really is something that helps me be more impactful in terms of everything that I have in personal relationship, professional relationships and stuff.
Yannick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Chitra.
Thank you for supporting the Codebreaker Mindset. For more episodes, go to www.chitranawbatt.com to like and subscribe. Connect with me on social media at Chitra Nawbatt.